Okay, after 3 weeks, we have a sense of the mind-body problem and about how people have been thinking about minds, bodies, and brains for, well, a very long time. We've worked ourselves up all the way to Aristotle in ancient Greece in the mid 300s BCE. Now what? Well, the next almost 2,000 years were in some ways extremely eventful. In late antiquity, we see the fall of Greece and the rise of Rome, the introduction of two important new monotheistic religions, and of course, the fall of Rome. In medieval times, we see a lot of wars and also some exploration and technological innovation, particularly those related to warfare. But famously, the medieval period in Europe was not so good for scholars and inquiry, hence the Dark Ages. But those things continued to develop and flourish in Africa, the Middle East, India, and East Asia. And thanks in part to those scholars, Europeans were able to rediscover many intellectual traditions that were lost or destroyed in medieval Europe, not least of which the philosophical works of the ancient Greeks. This rediscovery is what will give us the Renaissance period and, in contrast to the Dark Ages, the period known as the Enlightenment. Although the medieval scholars lost access to some ancient Greek texts, that is not to say they were unfamiliar with the ancient Greek ideas. You're probably at least vaguely familiar with the ways that medieval wars were backed by, and sometimes motivated by, religious as well as geopolitical aspirations. Muslim Moors from North Africa moved into the Iberian Peninsula, where there was a period of harmony between the three major Abrahamic traditions. But then they were violently expelled. Christian crusaders alternately captured and lost Jerusalem and portions of modern-day Israel. Rivals brought trade and sometimes military pressure from the east and north. It was, at times, quite literally, a bloody mess. But all three of the now prominent monotheistic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, also had vigorous internal debates during those time periods. And it's not too misleading to think of those debates as being basically framed by the Greek intellectual tradition that dominated late antiquity around the Mediterranean and that they all share. The big question, as the Crash Course video on YouTube emphasized, is whether one should be a Platonist or an Aristotelian. In all three religious traditions, we can find defenders of both approaches. By the Renaissance period in Europe, around 1600 CE, there was an important sense in which the followers of Aristotle had won. Religious Aristotelians include famous Jewish scholars like Maimonides and famous Muslim scholars like Averroes. But the sense in which Aristotle was winning is better captured by Christian scholars like Augustine of Hippo and Thomas Aquinas. Remember that by Christianity here, we mean what's now called Catholicism. Although Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses in 1517, Western Europe is still dominated by the Catholic Church. Indeed, one of the factors that motivated Luther and other reformers was the way the Church had accumulated wealth and power during this period, becoming the political force in Europe to which even kings owed their loyalty. And thanks to Augustine, Aquinas, and others, Aristotelianism had become the official doctrine of the Catholic Church. You can imagine how Aristotle's physics, with the Earth naturally at the center of the universe, worked nicely for the Church's view of creation, as does his biological hierarchy, the Great Chain of Being, with humans at the top of the terrestrial creatures, with our rational souls, and only angels and God above us. Aristotle's hylomorphism was also thought to work well with the doctrine of the Trinity, and so on. As you're no doubt aware, the Church was so committed to the Aristotelian cosmology that it initially rejected Copernicus' theory that the Sun and other planets orbit the Earth. And Galileo was jailed and his books banned for his observation that the Moon was not a perfect sphere, but had mountains and valleys like the Earth. That should be impossible if the Moon and heavenly objects are perfect spheres of ether moving in their perfectly circular orbits. This intellectual policing came from both the Church directly and from the intellectual institutions that it sanctioned and funded, such as the University of Paris, the Sorbonne. This is the context into which our next philosopher enters. René Descartes was born in France in 1596, and starting at age 11, he attended the Jesuit college Royal Henry Legrand at La Flèche. Later, Descartes studied to become a lawyer and served as a military officer and studied military engineering. At La Flèche, Descartes is sure to have been taught the Aristotelian tradition of the Church, including Aristotle's physics and his views on the soul, as well as Greek mathematics and logic. But Descartes also learned about Copernicus and Galileo, as well as about Galileo's fate. He was very much won over to the new mechanistic and mathematical physics, which replaces Aristotle's qualitative teleological explanations, that is, explanation in terms of the telos or purpose of things, with quantitative explanations based on mathematics and geometry and the postulation of laws of nature. There were many phenomena that put pressure on the old Aristotelian views, but important among them were the increased clarity and accuracy of astronomical observation that were enabled by Galileo's invention of the telescope, allowing him to closely observe the moon, as we already noted. Another important factor was the development of larger and more powerful weapons. The fact of the matter is that Aristotle's physics is a poor fit for the ballistic paths of projectiles and didn't enable accurate calculation of trajectories. So, as usual in the history of ideas, there were multiple trends that set the stage for Descartes.